think, spoke to the failures in the Child and Family Services industry in Canada, and I think was part of not only the call for an inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but the absolute reforms that had to take place in Child and Family Services in Bill C-92.
Tonight, reaction to the Children's Advocate report on how multiple systems failed. Tina Fontaine.
We are not trespassers on our own lands, and this is unceded Mi'kmaq, and we have to protect the water so people can buy land and do whatever and to their land. But when they start impacting the water surrounding it.
An East Coast gas company has gone to court to have water protectors removed from a work site they've occupied for 2 years.
I think it's important that you understand that you need to be proud of where you come from and enjoy the game for what it is. That's what it's meant to be.
And we talked to Indigenous NHLer Carrey Price about bullying and being the best goalie in the world.
Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen.
An Emergency Justice Committee meeting was quickly shut down today. This meeting comes in the wake of the ongoing controversial SNC-Lavalin scandal.
Our Amber Bernard was at today's emergency meeting.
Tension continues today between the Liberal majority on the Justice Committee and the opposition. Conservative MP Pierre Poilievre put forward a motion to have Jody Wilson-Raybould appear again.
That following the public statements of March 6th by Ms. Jody Wilson-Raybould offering to provide more information to Canadians should it be requested, the committee requests that she appear no later than Thursday, March 14th.
The clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Warnick, appeared twice, and Poilievre wants the same opportunity given to Wilson-Raybould. Instead, this happened.
At this point, this is a point of debate. We're going to move to a vote. We're going to, because I've spoken to the clerk, and at this point you haven't raised a point of order. You've raised a point of debate.
This is an attempt to shut down
the debate. Okay. Thank you. We're going to move to a vote. Meeting is adjourned.
Less than 30 minutes into the meeting, Liberals voted to end it. Most committee members left through the back door to avoid media.
That's unacceptable. Canadians deserve transparency. If these Liberals want to argue for why Jody Wilson-Raybould should not appear before the committee, then they should at the very least have the guts to do so in front of the cameras, where there's a transcript and a recorded vote. Instead, they want to take that discussion behind closed doors.
The Justice Committee will meet again behind closed doors on March 19th, the same day the federal government's pre-election budget is tabled. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations says the report into the life and death of Tina Fontaine is what Canadians need to know is happening. Carolyn Bennett does not think anyone can understand the pain that kids in foster care go through. Bennett says the 15-year-old's death changed the mindset of Canadians.
Tina Fontaine's death, I think, changed the consciousness of our nation. I think, spoke to the failures in the Child and Family Services industry in Canada, and I think was part of not only the call for an inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but the absolute reforms that had to take place in Child and Family Services in Bill C-92.
The tragic death of 15-year-old Tina Fontaine shocked the country, and it renewed calls for a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That inquiry began in September 2016 and is set to wrap up with a final report next month. Following the release of the Manitoba Children's Advocate report Tuesday, we have Inquiry Commissioner Michelle Audette with us to talk about the findings. So what was your reaction to the findings from the Children's Advocate yesterday?
Well, it was a mix of feeling because we were all shocked in August 2014 when we heard that tragedy of Tina Fontaine. And also the mobilization from people around the country, the world, to ask for answer and justice and making sure we understand what happened. And finally, there is that report from the Children's Advocate who will be very, very clear about the moment that she was born when she went to school, and then when she was wondering what happened to her dad, and then every institution that she went to or ended, they all didn't do what they were supposed to do. So again, a frustration, and unbelievable that it's still happening here in Canada. Was there anything in that report that you found particularly shocking or disturbing? Well, disturbing because I thought it was the police and then the social services, but finding out with all the story that we heard before, and also the report itself of telling us that it's official that five institutions failing her, that was unacceptable for me. Yeah. So do any of the recommendations that came from that report, do they match kind of what you guys are hearing? It does. It does. Something, though, for me was very really new, I would say, in the work we do now. It was the asking the school to do something when a children is, instead punishing the kid or the children, let's prevent, let's support, and let's help. For me, I thought it was so important, so important. There was a lot of mention, too, of sexual exploitation of youth. How often has this been brought up at the inquiry? For myself, every hearings that I participate, public or in camera, or every place I went parallel to this important task, the sexual violence was everywhere. Was either with their grandparents, their parents, themselves, and their children. So we're talking about 4 generations or 3 generations still alive, that many of them had that sad experience or unacceptable experience. Well, we look forward to your report. It's coming out on April 30th. Thank you for taking the time out today to join us and talk about this. Thank you. Au revoir. Water protectors and a natural gas company met in court this week. Alton Gas filed an injunction to remove the protectors who have been camped at their work site since 2017. Angel Moore brings us that story.
Water protectors came to court facing an injunction after years of camping on a proposed work site. An Alton Gas project plans to store natural gas underground, pumping salt brine into the Sabaganagati River. The protectors say the river is at risk.
It has not been effective. These processes and procedures are supposed to be in place to provide measure of protection for the rivers and as far as the environment goes. And we can see here today, even the judge can see here today, that that has not been followed to the letter of the law.
The lawyer for Alton Gas says the injunction is about trespassing. The protectors disagree.
We are not trespassers on our own lands, and this is unceded Mi'kma'ki, and we have to protect the water so people can buy land and do whatever and to their land. But when they start impacting the waters around it, and
Alton Gas says treaty rights can't be asserted by individuals. James Clausen, the lawyer for the water protectors, says it's not that simple.
And they're doing it on behalf of the collective and asked to do so by the collective. And so in that sense, they do have a right and an ability, and in this case, a duty to do it.
They hope the court will consider treaty and Aboriginal title.
We look forward to the next court date, and we look forward to further asserting our treaty and title on the Sabaganagati River.
The judge is set to release his decision early next week. Angel Moore, APTN National News, Halifax.
Members of the Blood Tribe in southern Alberta have voted to accept a $150 million settlement from the Canadian government. The Blood Tribe filed a claim 2 decades ago, stating Canada had mismanaged the tribe's assets in the early 1900s. That resulted in the loss of the tribe's cattle industry and the overstocking of pasture land. The funds will be transferred to the Blood Tribe following an appeal period and the execution of the agreement. APTN has reached out to Blood leadership. They say they aren't speaking to media at this point.
The Manitoba Métis Federation was in court Wednesday morning for a first in a series of dates to determine whether the province and Manitoba Hydro are legally obligated to honor a multi-million-dollar agreement they signed with the MMF. In March 2018, Premier Brian Pallister announced that the province was cancelling a tripartite agreement from 2014, which was to see the MMF receive $67 million for its support of transmission projects. The agreement was made with the then NDP government and Manitoba Hydro. Pallister called the payment, quote, persuasion money. On Wednesday, counsel for the province and Hydro attempted to have an affidavit from MMF President David Chartrand thrown out. Counsel for the MMF are looking forward to addressing the court at a preliminary hearing on April 12th.
Our clients have a long history of justice denied in this province, and I think that we want to get on with the hearing of the merits of this case because we think that it's so strong, but it's also so clear that what Manitoba did a year ago by quashing or by attempting to direct Manitoba Hydro to not proceed with that agreement with the MMF was unlawful and unconstitutional.
We're heading to Cat Lake First Nation to see what the new housing money will do for their community.
That's coming up after the break, but first here's tomorrow's weather forecast.
To the east coast, we've got 8s for Halifax and Fredericton, sunny skies. -3 and sunny in Cartwright, -10 and sunshine in Kuujjuaq. 5 in Chibougamau with some rain, Settles is raining and 1. 7 and rain in North Bay, 12 and rain in Toronto. Kapuskasing and Timmins are raining and 6 degrees, as is Wawa. +1 for the +1 for the Paw, -1 for Norway House. 0s for Barons River, Princess Harbour, and Gimli, and cloudy there. Lots of sun in the southern part of Saskatchewan. 1 for Saskatoon, Regina, and Yorkton. -4 in snow in Stony Rapids, +2 and snow in La Ronge and.
Welcome back. It's been 2 months since Cat Lake First Nation declared a state of emergency over poor housing conditions. Since then, Indigenous Services has committed $10 million for some new housing units. Negotiations for more continue. APTN News was in the community recently to find out what this means for Cat Lake citizens.
Bobby Umbash is only 30 years old, but the father of 5 recalls a different life as a young boy.
Because I remember living in the bush out there before we ever moved here.
So where did you live in the bush?
In our trap line.
That was before his family relocated here to what he calls Umbash Point. Today, he lives off the land as much as he can to provide for his family. Like others in the community, he hunts and gets his own wood.
My late brothers were the ones that taught me everything, and my dad.
Umbash still lives in the house he was raised in. His parents now live next door, and he has concerns over the shape of the aging 2-bedroom home.
Because once it gets cold, the floor gets really cold, and that's how they get sick, from the floor.
Umbash's home is one of over 100 houses inspected last December. It was the second set of housing inspections in less than 6 months. Chief Matthew Kiwikabo said mold was found.
They were able to determine the nature of the mold. They did tests on the mold they found, and they all came back positive it was mold in all the homes.
A report by Health Canada last summer revealed more than half the homes in Cat Lake showed signs of visible mold. The local leadership has long believed it's what is making some children and elders sick.
Lost elders from respiratory problems. And we've lost children. They can't go to school because they have skin diseases. We've had one medevac to London, Ontario, from playing in the mold in his house. It flared up when it got into his skin, and we nearly lost that kid.
8-year-old Lucas Mezite spent about 4 months in hospital after getting medevaced out of the fly-in community late last year. He told his grandmother Sarah he thought he was going to die.
And then the doctor came there. He said, you have to go to the Linden.
There's no medication for him because he's very sick.
Mezite says the doctor told her Lucas suffered an allergic reaction to penicillin, but she believes the mold in her home played a part. The inspection report for her house reveals excessive mold inside. In January, the community declared a state of emergency. Health Canada and ISC have failed to adequately respond to the repeated calls for urgent meetings and meaningful discussion with Chief and Council and advisors. The housing inspection report for Umbash's home found extensive mold throughout, but Umbash was never told the results of that inspection.
Because if I had mold in this house, I don't think we would live in here. Eh? Yeah, that's what I was telling my parents. Eh? If there was mold in here, well, I probably would have burnt it down already anyway. Eh?
On February 21st, an interim agreement was reached between the community and Indigenous Services, the department responsible for First Nation housing. ISC is providing $10 million to demolish and rebuild 15 houses, renovate 21 houses, and to bring in 10 portable housing units. Housing supplies for Cat Lake First Nation will have to come in on this winter road, but leaders say it's only weeks before the road is unusable. Warm weather has already stalled the delivery of the 10 units that were expected to arrive last weekend. In the meantime, Cat Lake and ISC are negotiating a final agreement. ISC officials say it will be for well over the $10 million they've already committed, and leaders in Cat Lake are pressing for more.
But in the meantime, we're asking for more in that agreement.
To them, this is only the beginning of addressing a long-standing issue. Lucas has since recovered and returned home, but his grandmother says it's no longer safe for him here.
What
I know is what I want them to do too. Eh? Like I pass my traditional things to them. Eh? And if they ever have kids, but I will tell them like how to keep them when they get sick. Eh?
And with those teachings, Umbash also hopes to pass on their new home to his kids. Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Cat Lake First Nation.
Time for another break, but we've got the Montreal Canadiens superstar goalie Carrey Price coming up.
That's when we come back, but first, here's the rest of tomorrow's weather forecast.
Off we go to northern Alberta. We've got sunshine and 3 and high levels at 3 and some snow in Fort McMurray. Lots of sun down south. Edmonton is 3, Red Deer's 2, Calgary's 4. 9 and rain in Kamloops, 7 and rain in Penticton. Sandspit is 7 and mostly sunny, and it's rainy in St. Prince Rupert. Rain in Dawson City and 3 degrees, sunshine and 3 degrees in Whitehorse. Fort Simpson's in at 0 and sunshine, -6 and snow in Wati. Tuktoyaktuk is -16 and snow. Palatuk, sunshine and 21. Clear skies in Cambridge Bay, -28. Mix of sun and cloud in Chesterfield, -19. -27 and clear in Arctic Bay, -29 and clear in Resolute, and -21 in Pangerton.
Welcome back. On today's edition of In Focus, we discussed repatriating Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis artifacts and remains back to their communities. Is enough being done? What are the challenges, and why do these people have our things anyway? Here's a look at what was on the show.
Remains a long-standing perception by Western colonial powers that they were culturally superior, spiritually superior. Indigenous peoples were, for part of this history at least, seen as novelties and were brought back to Europe as exhibitions. Peoples themselves, not just bones, but peoples. We have to remember that it wasn't that long ago in this world that we actually had things like human zoos, where Indigenous peoples from all over the world were collected, put in cages essentially, and then displayed for the benefit of Western audiences. So that's one aspect of this history. The other relates to the very problematic origin stories that we've maintained in this country for a very long period of time. This idea that it was empty land or terra nullius, and that people could just come in and collect whatever they saw fit. Now, that emptying of the land, you know, has more accurately been called a clearing of the land, and that was, of course, wrought by disease, by forced removal, forced relocations, destruction of culture, removal of children into residential schools, that then sort of perpetuated that myth that Indigenous peoples weren't present in certain areas and kind of legitimated or allowed these collectors to come in and kind of feel like they had a right, which of course they never have had a right to disturb sacred or ceremonial sites.
So back in 2017, I surveyed 12 universities across Canada, and what I learned was that, yeah, they are housing full skeletons to bone fragments of Indigenous human remains. University of Toronto, they had the highest number of Indigenous remains, sitting at 550. And then next was Memorial University. They had the second highest number of remains. They had approximately close to 200.
It was a record-breaking night in Montreal as Carrey Price made Canadiens franchise history with his 315th win. The Montreal Canadiens goalie set the franchise record in a 3-1 victory against the Detroit Red Wings. Sophie Claude Miller has more on Montreal's winningest goaltender.
Drafted in 2005, Carrey Price has had many accomplishments throughout his hockey career with the Montreal Canadiens. He won 2 gold Olympic medals, has a shelf full of trophies, and after last night's victory, he stood proudly from his 315th win, breaking yet another record for the Habs.
I'm sure he's proud, but he's a humble person. He's not going to say much, but that's quite an accomplishment. You know, it's never easy to do it, especially with one team. And he's done a great job ever since he's been here.
Price was born in Hannam Lake, British Columbia. His mother is a former chief of the Ulketcho First Nation. Coach Claude Julien remembers Price's younger years.
We had the All-Star game here in Montreal as part of the coaching staff, and you know, I remember seeing a real young player, you know, excited to play.
After 100 wins, Price already had the ambition for more.
It's cool to be able to get to 100, but you know, hopefully, like I said, hopefully there'll be a couple hundred more.
Coach Julien isn't surprised that Price broke the record of the late Jacques Plante.
His game tonight, he was without a doubt our best player. He was outstanding. Not only that, but he breaks a record fittingly with his performance tonight.
Carrey Price may now be the best goalie in the world, but he's still aware of the bullying young players can face.
You know, I feel like this game is meant for everybody. You know, it's obviously a league motto, but you know, I definitely have seen that you know, firsthand, and I think it's important that you understand that you need to be proud of where you come from and enjoy the game for what it is. That's what it's meant to be.
Sophie Claude Miller, APTN National News, Montreal.
And a big congrats to Carrey Price, even though I'm a Leafs fan. That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday. You can find much more on our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward.
And if you missed today's In Focus, which is also discussed the Prime Minister's apology for the mistreatment of Inuit and tuberculosis sanatoriums, you can watch it here tomorrow at 11 Eastern and 10 a.m. Central Time. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.